Hey friends, today I'm talking about mastering water in your watercolor painting and all about the flow. If you're new to my channel, my name is Nicki. I am all about making watercolor painting relaxing, stress-free, easy, and approachable. Ever feel like your watercolor painting is too streaky, too watery, you're not in control? Today I'm breaking down the perfect water control and watercolor painting. This is the key to better blending, smoother transitions, and more confident brush strokes. If you're into watercolor tips like these, let's get started. So water is everything in watercolor. It controls how colors blend, how they dry, and how much detail you can achieve. If you have too much water, and I love blooms and things like that, I'm going to show you some examples, but too much water will create blooms. So if you're not creating those blooms on purpose, then it may be something that will cause some irritation. Here I actually used a little bit of salt to create the blooms as well, but blooms happen when you use too much water when paint is just about ready to dry, so when it's a little bit damp. I'm going to show you some of my favorite techniques for controlling water and creating a little bit less bloom unless it's intentional and that is your style. Okay, I'm going to show you exactly how to manage it. So again, here are some examples of just some watercolor pieces I pulled out. Here I have, some spots where there is less water. So my brush is moving across the page a little bit with a little bit of tension. And then there are moments when there's a ton of water and I am letting that watercolor flow. This is a book that I hand bound and the cover is just one that I had fun with. Dropped in a lot of water. I started with a lot of water, dropped in even more as I created some highly pigmented areas and even dropped in some salt. Here is one that has less water in my brush and paint, but my paper was really wet. So I was able to layer in lots of saturation and create this moody night scene. And then there are moments where you'll use less water on dry paper to create, again, just a nice even level of saturation. These are all, again, just playful sketches in my sketchbooks and on practice sheets from Watercolor Made Simple, my book, and even my class. There we go. Okay, so this is a great example of using a lot of water to create transparency. Because remember, watercolor loves water. So we're going to do a little bit of troubleshooting. I'm going to show you how I get started, how I activate, and all of the different ways that you can control water, whether it's what's on your brush to what's in your palette, and even using water in your water cup. Okay, first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna activate this color. I have permanent mauve. It's gonna mix into my cadmium red, and that's okay. I'm just gonna play and have fun with it. Now my brush is dry, the paper is dry. I'm gonna start with dry on dry. That means we always have to start with a wet brush. Move my pen out of the way. That means the puddle that I'm going to work from, just grabbing, this is professional watercolor, so it's really pigmented. You can reactivate it. I do like to use it fresh out of the tube, but again, you can totally reactivate it. So I'm just going to allow my paper towel, maybe I'll move my paper towel up here. I'm just gonna allow my paper towel to absorb the excess water from my brush because watercolor brushes hold a ton of water. And I'm just going to work dry on dry. So my brush is going to be drier than normal. We're just gonna get it to a dry point where I want to show you what it looks like if you're working with a drier brush. So here I had still quite a bit of water on my brush. I'm just gonna grab a bit more paint. And then as the paint was being absorbed by the paper, I was starting to run out of water. So if you're finding that you're getting these streaky sort of brush strokes, it means you don't have enough water flow. So as your brush is touching the paper is cotton, it's going to pull and absorb that paint. But we want to work dry on dry sometimes. So again, I'm just gonna use the very tip of my brush because sometimes we want to create some really nice fine details So your brush strokes can be a little bit drier and your paper is dry. You can also get a very transparent look this way. I can do some dry brushing. To create some texture. You can even hear my brush. Create some really pretty texture. So dry on dry, if it's intentional, it's going to offer you a lot of opportunity to create some great marks. But if you're feeling frustrated because your watercolor is not flowing, then here are where the tips are really going to start to come in. So first off, we're going to do wet on damp paper. So to dampen your paper, there are two things that you can do. You can use a spray bottle. I use a spray bottle to activate the paint on my palette, but I also spray my paper as well, just to create a little bit of dampness. You can use your watercolor brush, and I'll even wet it here, to evenly create dampness. You'll see a tiny bit of that mauvey tone because my brush isn't fully cleaned off. But when you start to feel the page, you can feel that it's still a bit cool. It's a bit wet. I'm even gonna dampen or remove some of that dampness off the page. And then you can start creating just a lovely wash of color. Now, these brushes, so these are my Life I Design brushes. I design them so they're really easy to paint with. They absorb a lot of water and a lot of paint. So that way you can paint for a long time. You have control, you don't have to keep refilling. But the key is getting to know your tools. So get to know how much water your brushes pick up, how much paint you can actually pull into that brush. So every time I'm pushing paint into that brush, those bristles are thirsty. They're gonna absorb all that beautiful paint. And then when I go to release that paint, and that's essentially what you're doing, you're releasing the paint on the paper because the paper is cotton. It's going to pull all that moisture off your brush. You'll be able to create a really nice even layer of watercolor that's already on damp paper, and it's going to blend and move really beautifully. Now this is slightly damp. We're gonna work the other way actually. We're gonna see if we can get it to blend as nicely. So as I'm chatting, the paper has dried. And I do see it's starting to skip a little bit. It was completely dry here, but I do see that it is a little bit harder for me to get more of an even layer. I do have a tiny bit of streaks, but that's really great for skies. And while this background is a little bit wet, I can drop in more paint and create some beautiful, just a gradual flow. So I've got some nice dark moments happening up here, and then it gradually can get lighter and even lighter if I choose to, okay? So again, I'm practicing how much dampness or how wet my paper is, how much water I have on my brush. So if I load it up, I go here and add a nice, generous brush stroke. But if I go back to it and I want to move that paint around and I just drop my brush in that water, I'm actually applying more water to this puddle, and it's starting to make it become more transparent, and you're going to get these blobs, which of course, if you're in control, you can move them around and have them dry in a really interesting way. But you may not want that where there's a lot of unevenness in texture and tone within a brush stroke. You may want something that is a little bit more uniform. It always comes down to water control. And I always say, you're in control when your paint stroke is still damp. So if you found that you went maybe a little bit too far down here working on a sky and you want to remove some of that paint, you can do that while the brush stroke is still wet. And without dipping my brush into the water jar, I can go back and create again just a little bit more of that fading towards the bottom. Again, I'm thinking about skies. And I have to say, I really love this color. There's that beautiful granulation. It's permanent mauve. I don't paint with a lot of mauve, but permanent mauve by Winsor & Newton, professional watercolor. but I love that granulation there. Okay, so that's damp. Now, if you want to work wet on wet, so I'm thinking about florals here, you can do that again in two ways. You can add just a really nice wet spray of water. Let's go ahead and add some paint so you can see what that looks like. And again, you can create some beautiful texture. But if I want to work wet on wet, I'm just gonna activate my puddle a little bit more. I'll go ahead and paint, and we'll just do a couple of petals. So I'm putting wet paint down first, and then going and activating my brush and starting from just the base of that petal, I can start to push my paint up, and wherever there's water, that paint will flow. And again, I'm in control. I can move that those little paint puddles around and have it fill in that loose stroke as much or as little as I want. Cleaning off my brush, dabbing it off. I can even pull back a little bit. Because my brush is dry, it's picking up that excess paint in the puddles. So again, I'm in control. So if you're finding that you're seeing things like this, is I think a really great example of just a beautiful blend of water to paint ratio. I really like the opacity. And then this, I dropped in water while it was still just about to dry, so I'm getting that blooming. I love blooms. I'm not against them, so I don't fight them. I'm actually going to show you how to add a bloom here. So again, this is almost dry. My brush is wet, and I'm going to just add a little bit of water, and we're going to see what happens when it dries. Okay, so I'm adding a bit of water. You can see the water is starting to push back that pigment and create those blooms that, again, I think are beautiful. Okay, so if your paper is overly wet, so similar to this here, let me spray one more time. I'm gonna go across. And you're trying to create something that has maybe a smoother transition, and you're filling in shapes and things like that, and you're not sure why your paper is buckling, and you're having too many crevices as the paint is drying, and you're feeling frustrated, it's again water control. So it's too much water on your paper. Your paper may not be able to handle it. This is sketchbook paper that's more for mixed media, so it can't handle a ton of water. And you'll start to see that you're going to get warping. And even if you're trying to create just an even flow and texture of paint, it's going to have areas where the paper is already grabbing onto like a lot of water and create warping and puddles within your piece, unfortunately. But again, the best thing to do is pull out your sketchbook, do practices like this where you're working with, you know, one brush, one type of paper that you consistently want to work with and work on, and get to know how much or how little water and paint your brush picks up, how far it can go. I always love to do leaves if I'm testing. How often you need to refill or here we go, running out here a little bit, reload your brush, and even it'll help you test how much water your paper can handle and how wet you can get. If you're painting really loose, then you'll want to work with paper that will allow you to create that loose sort of finish, okay? Again, the best way to really enjoy painting with watercolor is to learn how to control the paint that you mix on your palette, how much water and paint you pick up and you have on your brush, and then what happens when you lay it down on your paper. Make notes to yourself, do experiments, do tests, and get to know things that are happening. Look at how, I mean, this is disappointing. If you were to work on a sky or to fill in a shape, see how so much water has forced these edges to create puddles. Can be pretty for a background if that's your intention. But again, that can be frustrating if you're trying to create just some beautiful, really even fills in your watercolor pieces. Okay, I hope that helped you. So watercolor painting takes practice. Having the essential techniques to get you in control more so that you feel more confident with what's happening on your paper and your puddle is really all it takes. If you want to dive deeper into tips like these, then go ahead and check out my online classes, Watercolors Made Simple, and my book by the same name, Watercolor Made Simple. The links are in the description for you. And if you're struggling with some of your watercolor paintings and want me to create more of these tutorials, then just comment below and let me know. Happy painting, have fun practicing, good luck with your water control, and I'll see you next time.